Dear friends, the wait for the new Incoterms 2020 is finally over. Now this Incoterms, when I talk around, Incoterm when we say around is international commerce terms. What we plan to cover up in today's session is, first thing is, what are the purpose of Incoterms? Why do we use Incoterms? What are the purpose around it? Second, what is ICC? Because the people who have launched it is ICC, International Chambers of Commerce, and how the evolution of Incoterms. Incoterms first was launched in 1936, and this is the 9th edition, which has been launched in September. But it is basically eligibility is from 1st January 2020. Grouping up obligation between buyers and sellers. Now, when we do any international trading, international sales, international commerce, basically two players are involved, the buyers and the seller. Now, buyer is obviously asking for some goods, and the goods have to move from one place to another place. So when the goods have to move from one place to another place, it comes across many issues around. Could be the shipping, could be unloading, loading, everything around. Custom clearance, and various modes of transports around. So the question comes when we are involved with so many risk parameters around, cost around, who bears the cost of X and Y activities? Who bears the risk around? So all these obligations, who takes care of the documents around? Shipping documents, bill of ladings, custom clearance wise, I need export clearance, I need import clearance. Who takes care of what? So basically, Incoterms helps us to identify the obligations between the buyer and the seller. Next comes now Incoterms 2020 versus 2010. The reason of comparison why I have included is many of you are still using Incoterms 2010. Many of you have got a long-term agreements with some suppliers who have got agreement with you for next 2 years, 3 years, based on Incoterm in your contract. So I just want to show around what exactly is the difference between 2010 and 2020. Normally, these Incoterms are updated after every 10 years. The rules, one good thing is in the 2010 also we had 11 rules. Now also we have 11 rules. One major rule has been changed, which I'll explain later. Understanding the various rules and their uses. So I will go through my presentations, which rule to use when and where. Each rule has its liabilities and risk also around, so you have to understand. Effective date of implementation, as I said to you, is from 1st January. If any one of you is raising a purchase order now, and you say as per EXW, as per CIP, as per DDP, whatever you say, but if you're not mentioning whether it's Incoterm 2010 or 2020, it automatically takes the latest one. So be careful in case your contract is based on the old one and your purchase order is based on the contract which was signed 6 months back, then you have to use the right Incoterms. If it is 2010, then do mention Incoterms 2010. I'll also walk through the practical tips for using Incoterms. Now, the objective of all this is to learn the correct use of Incoterms under different scenarios and mitigate the risk. So the bottom line is risk mitigations. But if I look around broadly, Incoterms concept comes up. Let's take an example around so you will better understand the meaning of Incoterms around. Incoterms I'll call as a common language. Let's say we have got a group of international business people discussing shipping of trade. Somebody could say, guys, I don't need Incoterms. I can write in my contract. Yes, you can write. Who will take care of shipping? Who will take care of loading? There are 10 points from one end to another end where there's a loading and unloading involved around. Who takes care of what? You can put down everything in the contract. But then if you are the one dealing with 10 suppliers, there's a possibility, and those 10 are from different countries, there's a possibility of inconsistency. And ultimately, if there's a legal dispute, that could happen issues around. So these Incoterms, which are universally accepted, it becomes a common language to cover the liabilities, to cover the risk, and to cover it. Keep in mind, Incoterm is not a law, But once Incoterms are incorporated into the contract, so then if any interpretation has to be done, it goes as per ICC. Now, ICC, when we talk about, is nothing but International Chambers of Commerce. It's based in Geneva. Their job is to promote global trade and investment. They work very closely with the UN and WTO. Now, Incoterms, as I said to you in the beginning, is nothing but IN comes from the international. And then this is somewhat misnomer because now it can be used for domestic also. With the name, it is international. Commerce, CO is from the commerce and the terms. So this terminology, when we talk around, as of from the 2010, I can say this can be used for both. So Incoterms define the mutual obligations of seller and the buyers arising from the movement of goods. The goods are moving. So keep in mind, Incoterms are not used for services. It is only for the movement of goods. It's internationally recognized, standardized term. And you could say it's a common language, or I could call it a lingua franca, used in domestic and this one. Now, the role of Incoterms. Now, as I said to you in the beginning, it outlines the obligations in any trade transactions around. So let's explain you properly the grouping of obligation. Seller versus buyer. Now, the seller has to provide the goods. Any contract you talk around, so seller has to provide the goods as per the contract. What does the buyer does? Payment of the price. Seller must licenses and authorization and formalities. And then the buyer also takes care of licenses, authorization and formalities. Contract of carriages and insurance. It depends again on the terms. So the role could be this one. Buyer also takes care of contract of carriage depending on the Incoterms. Seller must take the delivery, and then taking delivery on the other side, the buyer also should take it. Transfer of risk, and then we have the division of the cost around. You can imagine that we have over the chain of the whole supply chain, from one end to another end, my goods might be coming from New Jersey, loaded in the train, then to the truck, then to the ship. You can imagine how many times loading and unloading is involved around. So that's the one I talk around is the division of costs. So what cost the buyer will take care, what cost supplier will take care. You can imagine if you have to write in the contract, it needs a lot of verbiage around. Notice to the buyer, proof of delivery, transport documentation, checking, packaging, marking. You can see so much of obligations around on both sides. So that can be mitigated. Now the importance part, I think you can imagine, it simplifies the negotiations part and ensures a common understanding of the obligation. So removes the inconsistency, removes the confusion also around. Let's look at the whole global logistics steps around. Starts from the one end from the factory, you pack it, you load it. It goes to the preliminary transportation, which could be one mode or maybe two modes or maybe three modes. Then it goes to the custom clearances. It goes to the handling of the outbound logistics around, the insurance part. Again, handling of the inbounds, custom clearance, final transportation, unloading. So you will find the last unloading, out of the 11 Incoterms, only one Incoterms covers. The rest are left loaded. So the buyer has to unload it. So the Incoterms 2020 rules, if I look, there are 4 groups around: E group, F group, C group, D group. Now the E group is nothing but X works, the low commitment. So the monkey is on the shoulder of the buyer. The buyer takes care of all the risk around and the liabilities around. Group F, the main carriage is paid by the buyer. FCA, free carrier. Now, free carrier can be used for all mode of transportation. Free on board, free alongside ship. Now, in this case, there's a moderate commitment around. Supplier job is only to give to the point, and from there, if any carriage has to be paid, buyer pays for it, but the supplier organizes it. Now, Group C is a main carriage paid by the seller, CFR, CPT, SIP, CIP, again high commitments, again one is CIF and CIP. Now the Group D is the next one, DPU, DAP and DDP. Now the DPU which you were used to DAT in 2010, in 2010 was saying DAT delivered at terminal. So the terminal could be a station, terminal could be a port, terminal could be anything. But here, based on the previous uses, they found it doesn't serve much purpose. So they have come with the DPU, delivered at place, unloaded. So that means it is delivered at the place. So more or less it is like DAP. So there's not much difference between DAP and DPU, except at the point of final place, it has to unload. The supplier has to take care of unloading. So that's the difference around. So DPU and DAP both are similar except the unloading and loading part around. Now DDP, certainly it covers end to end. I would say DDP is nothing but the one other end of the X works. So if I take EXW, which is X works, where you have got the buyer has got all the commitments, while DDP supplier has taken all the commitments. So monkeys on the shoulder of the supplier when I talk of DDP. Again, one thing I'll advise that whenever you're using EXW and your funding is coming through letter of credit or something, I would advise not to use EXW because of the other problems around. Coming back to the categories, E terms, F terms, so already clarified. Now the key changes, let me explain the changes which has come up around, because I know most of you have been using 2010. So let me start to make it simpler. What are the key changes around? Now the key changes is DAT, Incoterms change to DPU. As I explained to you, DAT is delivered at terminal. And terminal could be a port, terminal could be a station, terminal could be anything. Could be a warehouse also. Now change to DPU, delivered at place, unloaded. So it is nothing but more like a DAP, except unloading also supplier has to do it out. Insurance points are clarified in SIF and SIP Incoterms. If you see around when we use CIF and CIP, that's the place supplier is taking care of insurance from one port to another port. Now, when they take care of insurance, as per the Incoterms 2010, the requirement was they can follow the Institute Cargo Clause as per C. C is the lowest level of insurance coverage. There's a cat A, B, C. So the clauses are 3, A, B, C. So C is the lowest one. That means as per 2010, I could have given you C clauses, which doesn't cover many things around strikes and other issues around. It covers a very bare minimum. Now CIF and CIP, they were put on the same levels, and supplier will give you under the C clause, and if problem used to come, but then they found, where do we use CIF? Where do I use CIP? CIP is a multi-modal transport basis around. CIF is basically for maritime, for waterways. It could be inland waterways or external waterways, basically maritime. Now, when we use CIF, basically we're using it for the bulk items. Now, for the bulk items, they don't go with the containerized approach, while in CIP, it is going with full truckloads, and they are containerized, they are multimodals. So in CIP, they wanted to cover up to high level, to A level. So CIF, because in a bulk, I know where the damage is there. But in CIP, it's in the container. I won't know where the damage has happened. So in the process to give a better coverage, so CIP allows you now, by mandatory as per the guideline, if I say CIP, let's say Mumbai port or something, then obviously CIP covers up to A level. Institute of Cargo Clauses A. while in the CIF, supplier can give you C. Next is the cost, and the cost structures are now clarified. So the costs which are involved around, those structures involved, which cost they will bear, which cost supplier will bear. Security, after 9/11, because the Incoterms was designed in 2010 or 2009, you could say, and launched in 1st January 2010. But what happened, you know, all around 9/11 case around, security has become much bigger issue. So security has become issues over the time. So that clarity has been given much bigger for each of the rules. So all the 11 rules, security clause has been clarified in terms of responsibility and liability. Provisions to allow for own transport rather than assuming third-party transports. In the past, in 2010, it was assumed that everybody using third-party transports. But sometime when I'm using DAP, I'm using DAT, or let's say, now I'm calling DPU, I may use my own transportation. Or even if I'm using FCA, I might be using my own transportation, may not use third-party transportation. So that option has been included around. FCA and FOB and bill of lading. This used to be a nuisance around. Wherever I met around last time, I was with one of the steel companies, FCA versus FOB. So if they are getting the funding through letter of credits, obviously the banks wants, this change has been done at the request of the banks. So the banks wants as per the letter of credit. Now if I'm doing with FOB, yes, I load it, I get my letter of bill of lading and I do it. In FCA, I give it to the carrier. The bill of lading, it used to have complexities around. So now I think it has been allowed with FCA to get the bill of lading around. I would say another one, the previous book, which I have the copies around, and the new book, the presentation and design is much user-friendly, which was not there in the past. Let's start with the first one, DAT versus DPU. So DAT rule was delivered at terminal, has been renamed delivered at place, unloaded. This name change underlying the fact the delivery can happen anywhere, not just at the transport terminal. It can happen at, earlier when we were saying DAT, T was a terminal. It could be warehouse terminals, could be cargo terminals, could be train, could be whatever you call around, but now we are saying the place, the buyer's place. So that means it can go up to that, and then the buyer, and unloading is also done by the supplier. As with DAT, this is only rule that requires the seller to unload the goods at their destination. Among all the 11 rules, this is the only rule which allows basically seller to unload the goods. But now how far it is practical, that I leave it to you, because my experience shows if seller is sitting in a remote place and for him or her, for that company to get someone local one to unload, those complexities could be there. So I leave it to you when to use, how to use. Next is the freight insurance. As I said to you, the CIP rules. The level of cover for any damage, any theft, unless otherwise specified in the agreement, until you have asked for the A clause. Otherwise, supplier, if you're not asking for it, supplier will give you this. Wherever I've done the programs, I think whenever I asked them, even recently I was doing a 1 month back with one of the steel company, I asked everybody around. I said, no, what is the cargo clause? What is the coverage? Sir, insurance is done, but we don't know which clause it is. So I think we need to understand there are A, B, C clause. We need to understand what is covered under C, what is covered under A. So A you may call all risk, but when we say all risk covered, technically it does not cover everything on the earth, like strikes and other things, it still doesn't cover. So there are still some loopholes one need to understand. Now for the CIF rule, there has been no change. So that means in the CIF, whatever was allowed in the past, same remains, institute cargo clauses C. The reasoning here is that CIF is popular with commodity transaction, as I said to you, the bulk items, where this low level of cover is widely accepted around. But normally I tell you around where I was used to it when I was doing globally coverage around, I had a global insurance. The way I used to pay around 1% for the global insurance. So it is not a very high cost for the risk what you get around. FCA and bill of lading. According to FCA, the buyer must contract or arrange at its own cost for the carriage of goods. So the buyer is basically taken care of from the FCA point. And keep in mind, when I say CA carrier, now carrier could be air terminal, carrier could be the train terminals, can be port ones, could be for the multimodals. Or it could be some supplier's place also, it could be any place. Like I got a freight forwarder agent somewhere, I'll say, guy, give to this. So that become individual can also be my carrier. So there's a gap in delivery between FCA and FOB. If you're selling FCA, your delivery point is different to FOB. So there is a significant cost and risk around. So now, as I said to you, based on the request from the banks, I think this has been allowed. Now what FCA states around, if the parties have so agreed, parties being the buyer and the supplier, the buyer must instruct the carrier to issue to the seller at the buyer's cost and risk a transport document stating that goods have been loaded, such as bill of lading, with an onboard notation. So that is a requirement, which I feel will solve many issues around where I have seen and dealt with. Next comes the listing of cost. This used to be normal issues, and I have asked many people, many participants. I said, do you know who's going to unload it? What happens to this? I think the cost part, which happens in a normal, if I take the long end-to-end supply chain, 15, 16 places are involved, loading, unloading, carriages, pre-carriage, post-carriage. Who takes care of the cost around? So that cost part, I think, is much clearer now. I think it makes much more simpler. Security is security. Cargo securities has been particularly important since 9/11. I'm sure many of you have seen when things were taken away in Somalia and other places around. So cargo security has become very important around. And even I have suffered once. I know I sent the goods for the refugee camp, and on the way it was taken up. So there are issues of securities around. Since last revision of the Incoterms 20, the geopolitical backdrop against which we are doing the international trade is conduct has changed significantly. With that in mind, the ICC has expanded security-related requirements, and there are new provisions to allocate responsibility between them. Carriage, I think this I have explained you, so you can have your own carriage, not issue around. Presentational wise, as I said in the beginning, it's much better, much clearer, so it's easy to understand and read it now, very user-friendly. Let's look at the whole bigger picture. Acronym when we talk about between seller and a buyer. There is, obviously there's the goods, then there's the seller's risk, there's the seller's cost around. So the seller goods are starting from their own premises to the buyer's premises. Then there's the seller's cost. So keep in mind, I just want to explain here is, one is pre-carriage to the carrier point. It could be ship, it could be air, could be train, whatever could be there. So there's a pre-carriage, main carriage, and the on-carriage. So keep in mind, there are three parts around, and custom is involved at two places, export clearance and import clearance. Let's start with the EXW. The seller fulfills his obligations to deliver when he has made the goods available at his premises. The seller is not responsible for loading the goods. Keep in mind, it's just like you and me, we go to the mall, say, guys, here's the goods. But in case you want the seller to load, but then you have to write in the contract. So you have to say EXW plus loading at my whatever vehicle or whatever transportation you have around. So you can add that part. The seller, in principle, if I just say EXW and I write the name of the place from where it's origin, then the guy will say, guys, here's the goods, take it. If anything happens on the way, you're loading, unloading, is at your risk. You can't stop the payments. The seller is not responsible for clearing the goods for export unless agreed. The buyer bears all the costs. As I said in the beginning, we use the word monkey in the business school very oftenly. The supplier has got nothing to worry. The monkey is on the shoulder of the buyer. So you have to keep in mind, if something you're buying from abroad and time is a sense of it, I would say give the responsibility to the supplier. Because then you can pass on the problems and responsibility to the supplier. So that's the way I will look at it. Coming back to the, again, E-terms around, I think it's very clear. Supplier, seller is up to the very beginning, up to the origin points. So seller is taking care of the complete risk and cost also. I think this explains it much better. Look around the people who are involved. The very beginning is the seller. The second, again, somebody is making the export documentations. After that, it is going to the any carriers around. Then in case it is going to the port, somebody is loading it, unloading it. Ships rails around, on board, again on board, and then ships rail for unloading purpose, discharging, delivery. So look around at the bottom and we say seller's risk is very small, only up to the very beginning. They are not taking care of export documentation even. Seller is only saying, guys, come to my exporter premises, take the goods. Seller cost is only up to that. The rest, buyer is taking complete activities around. So the buyer has to take care of insurance, the buyer has to pay all the costs around. Sometimes it works out economical. I know many people who are buying bulk items. They have their own freight arrangement, they have their own things around. It works economical for many people who are buying in bulk. Next comes the group F. It could be free alongside ship, free carriers, free on board. Now the very first one is very simple. Your supplier has to deliver the goods alongside the ship. Then later on, while loading, unloading, all those risks part, I think I'll explain soon. Similarly on FOB, supplier takes the responsibility for loading on the board. If you're loading on the board and the slings break, supplier takes the responsibility. Even I would say, that is not mentioned in the Incoterm insurance-wise, supplier normally takes care of insurance coverage till the FOB point. Anything can happen on the way. Free carrier is a multi-modal things around, but again, responsibility ends of the supplier at the carrier point. And the definition of carrier I explained to you could be individuals, could be any terminals. I think this one explains you FCA a little more clarity-wise. So if you look at this in terms of risk and the cost, and the seller cost is the seller takes care of obviously getting the goods, export documentation also. So export license is taken care by the seller, delivered at the named place of frontier / terminal / it depends which mode of transportation you're using it. So the whole cost up to that point around. Then comes the seller's cost. The seller cost is also up to that point. So the buyer takes the take care of from the rail in case it is going by sea, outboard, onboard, all those things. At the end of the day, unloading it, insurance coverage, supplier takes care of it. So keep in mind, FCA is a multimodal Incoterms, while FOB is only for maritime. So if you, technically, if I look around, many of the items goes from one end to another and they have to go through many modes of transportation. So if you are looking from that, I think FCA suits well. Now let's look at the FOB. So if you see in this chart, which gives you understanding of all this around, again, all those expenses which are shown you charges, packaging cost, loading charges, delivery to the ports around, export duties, origin terminal charges, loading on carriages, carriage charge, each is costing something. Insurance. So if you look around, insurance coverage is not required as per the Incoterms. So that means whether I'm using FCA, whether I'm using FAS, FOB, but keep in mind, suppliers are smart enough and they're doing on FCA or FOB. If anything happens from their premises up to the boarding point, there's a risk. So normally they do cover with some mechanism, but Incoterm is not making any mandatory or must order. Destination terminal charges, delivery to the destination, import duties around. So that shows you what buyer is covering around, what seller is covering around. If you compare FCA versus FOB, FCA is covering basically up to the point of export duty and taxes, but original terminal charges, loading charges, carriage charges is all being paid by the buyer. While in the case of FOB, it starts from carriage charges till import duties. Now this term also you will see very oftenly. I mean abroad we use very common, but here I still to see in company where the people use container yards, container freight stations around. So the term could be CY, CFS. So in case you guys are using it, then let's understand around, but that is very clear in Incoterms. Now container freight station is used normally if it's less than a container load, while the CFS is used where I got everything full container loads around. So keep in mind, I know this term people do ask around, do you know the difference in CY, CFS, when to use, where to use? So one for the full container load shipment, other one is partial. Next come the group C, CFR, CIF, CPT, CIP. First thing, let's understand CFR and CIP. They're both maritime. CPT and CIP is basically for multimodals, any transportation. So if you're doing with only sea from one port to another port at the end of it, that's all, then use CFR, CFP. CFR is cost and freight, cost, insurance and freight, carriage paid to, carriage and insurance paid to. So in short, I would say CFR, CPT is mirror image, except one is for the multimodal, one is for the sea. Other one, same way CIF and CIP is multimodal one is only for the maritime. So keep in mind, this is how it is there, CFR versus this. If I say CFR, now look around what it covers. Now, cost and freight. That means my supplier is taking care of sellers, from the seller's premises, export documents, taking care of delivering to the points, loading, and then ship on the ship rail. After that, the seller risk is not there. Keep in mind, this question I always had around whenever we interview people around, guys, who takes care of it? The seller is taking care of insurance on your behalf. Seller is paying the cost, but they charge you. So this question normally I used to have, guys, in case your goods are coming from Hong Kong, on the way ship reaches some turmoil or something, your container falls down, it doesn't reach you. Can you stop the payments around? So keep in mind, you become the owner per se, the moment the risk is passed on to you. So when we say the risk transfer, the ownership transfers, keep in mind. So the seller is taking the risk only up to the ship rail at the starting point. But the moment it is loaded, the ship has started, insurance coverage is there, but that insurance coverage is on your behalf, yes, but responsibility is yours. So keep in mind, you cannot stop the payment if anything goes wrong there. The guy will say, I've given you bill of lading at the point of loading, and my payment terms are 30 days from the bill of lading, you have to pay. Legally, I'm talking around. So when I say the bottom seller's insurable interest, and prudence may dictate purchase of insurance coverage. So insurance coverage is required as a prudence if I look around that. Let's look at the CIF. Now the name port of destinations. Here also I'm doing is cost insurance paid to. Here I got seller risk and seller this. So the ownership transfers from that place onward around. CIP. Now you will see the difference between CIP and CIF here. Now in CIP, my risk and the costs are going up to this point because I'm not using this C mode, maybe using C mode, but again, I'm using some other mode transportation as well. So technically this shifts to delivered at named place or frontiers, terminals, whatever maybe. So it could be anything. If it is a port, end up with a port, yes. But if it's going by air or going by train, so that goes up to that point around. Since it's a multimodal. So I might have used the ship, then I use the train, so it goes up to that point around, the train station. So CIP covers still longer chain of the supply chain. So here you can see again the differences, very summarized way. So between CFR, CIF, CPT, and CIP. So you can see around CFR insurance is not mentioned. The buyer has to take it as a prudence, I would say. CPT also insurance is not covered. But CIF and CIP, seller takes care of insurance. But then other one are the terminal charges, destination terminal charges, CFR, CIF, they take care. The buyer takes care. While in the case of CPT, seller is there. Rest are, I think, more or less similar. The next one, the next group, D group, delivered at place, unloaded, and delivered duty paid around. So I would put it this way, DAP, very first one. You have the cost, you can see around, goes up to the end. So seller takes care of the complete cost up to the buyer's premises, a buyer place, whatever you define. But the one gap is there around that custom clearance, the custom charges that the buyer takes care. So the buyer takes care of that gap around, but the risk part is end to end. But unloading is not done by the seller. Again, I would say around whenever you're using DAP or any Incoterms around, do mention the place. So you have to define the place. If you just say place as India, then there's a big country around. You have to spell the place, which city, where you want this to be. So keep in mind the documentation part. So all the documentation is taken care by this supplier. The only part, the documentation you are taking care in DAP is custom, custom, custom. So when I compare with DDP, this gap you will not see. In the custom case in DDP, they cover the whole chain around. So DPU is delivered at place, unloaded. You could say DPU is nothing but natural extension of DAP term. As under DAP, the seller is required to only deliver ready for unloading, whereas DPU, the seller delivers when the goods are placed at the disposal of the buyer. The seller bears all the risk involved up to the named place of destination, including the risk of moving the goods and unloading them. So to me, this is totally end-to-end. So I expect this will be more popular than even DAP. Now coming back to DDP. So here you can see the cost risk documents. It goes up to end-to-end. But again, at the buyer premises, the truck reaches the buyer premises. The cost of unloading the buyer has to pay. The risk of unloading the buyer has to pay. If any documentation per se required, the buyer has to take care. So technically it goes up to that limit around. So DDP per se covers the whole chain. I've also seen sometimes people using DDP, but then supplier is not conversant with, since it's more like a non-resident, he's not the importer in country importers around, they may have some problems around, and the buyer takes care. We say, guys, we will take care of custom clearance. So the custom clearance, then they write DDP, VAT excluded, custom duty excluded. You can write that also. Now here again, I want to broadly explain, I think it shows very well. If you talk of Incoterms 2010, which you're all used to it by now, the circles which you see around from where the risk transfers around, XWs, EXWs, then FCAs, then it shows you where the terminal risks passes on from one end to another, the transfer of risk. So keep in mind, when the transfer of risk happens in one way, that means you become the owner for taking care of all the problems. They might be paying for you, supplier might be paying for you. If you look at the CPT, or even look at the CIF, the circle is here, the extra edge, you guys are taking care of it. So the purpose of showing is because 2010 is still many of the Incoterms are same, so that's why I used it around. Now let's look at 2020. So this gives you the whole chart of responsibility. So if you see around EXW, FCA, the last one, if I see around DAP, DPU, and DDP. So if you see in this last column, the buyer is the only one taking care of unloading at destination, at DDP. Although normally we say delivered duty paid, end to end. Yes, it is end to end, but the unloading part, the buyer is taking care. The only place where the buyer is taking care of everything is in DPU, except the custom clearance. So the custom clearance in DPU is taken care of by the buyer. But sometime when people I see around using DAP except this custom duty, then I'll prefer DPU then. So your responsibility is only one box. While in the case of DDP, obviously the responsibility as it is stands is one. But if you're taking care of custom, then the two boxes you have to cover around. So keep in mind that factor as well. So DAP, you can see the differences. All are multimodals. So keep in mind. Then CFR, CPT, that's the way around. Keep in mind, Incoterms do not determine the ownership, but they transfer the ownership. Title is transferred. Not revoke payments, and they are not the law. There is no default Incoterms per se. So this is where I just thought around, let me touch a few things around. Incoterms, those of you who are importing from the US. So here I just thought, let me touch. If you're importing from the US, my advice would be go for the CIF. Or if you have your own insurance coverage, which you feel is much comprehensive, then go on CFR. Similarly, when you're exporting to the US, CIF, CFR, that's where I advise. Same way we have done something for China, but maybe time is short. The 3 tips to know on how to use Incoterms. Choose the right rule. The right rule means in terms of your risk, in terms of your cost, in terms of your liabilities, in terms of letter of credit in case you're using the documents. So keep that factor in mind. And then if you got your own freight forwarder, which is very strong, you may like to use different modes around. So you have to look at the economy as well and the risk as well. Specify the place and port precisely. This one is very important around port. If you don't specify the port, you just say India, which port? Supplier may send to any ports. It could be Chennai, could be Mumbai, could be Kandla, could be anyone's. So you have to spell it out. Don't leave it to the supplier. Incorporate them into the contract as well as letter of credit and invoice. So all these Incoterms must be part of your contracts, must be part of your purchase orders and letter of credits and invoices around. So you must use all this. Now let me explain a little bit the cargo clause C, because since we have touched this point around, what does C cover? It covers the fire, if anything happens, explosion happens, sinking of the vessels, overturning of the vehicles, vessel collisions with any external objects, discharge of cargo at the port of distress. No cover is provided for accidental damage or physical loss of the goods. If on the way you say, oh, this is broken, I remember we used to ship sometime vehicles, the radio is taken out, this is taken out, they are not covered. So you have to put a clause as well. And the difference in the value is not that big around, so I leave it to your prudency what to use. The common mistakes which I want to tell, last one is this one. This is what I have collected around. That means some company think that Incoterms rule shows ownership passes. They do not, but where the risk passes, that's the way I would put it. Yes. If using the FCA term, then a place must be named around. So FCA should not be left just FCA. Place the name where this carrier is. Buyer accept DDP terms, but don't check if their foreign supplier is registered as an importer. Supplier is agreed, but they don't know whether supplier has got registered importer or not. So those complexities could come around. Using FOB for containerized freight is an old fashion, does not fit the modern supply chain operation. One issue is that once goods are in container, the seller does not know where the damage occurs. So I would say use for FCA, CIF, CIP, whenever you are insuring it, keep in mind minimum 110% of the value. Using groups C, CFR, CPT, especially misunderstood sometime in terms of risk and losses. Using DAP, I think I've explained around, without naming a place, you could get in troubles. All of the Incoterms rules must have a place name after the 3 letters. So those 3 lovely letters around must be followed by this place. If I give you example, I'm doing the shipping to USA to India, term is CPT India. What does it mean? It's very vague. So seller may choose any place around. Then extra cost, you will have to bear it. So be specific, be clear around. Now, what is the effective date of Incoterms? Obviously, the effective date is 1st January 2020. But if you have made an agreement with someone on 2010, that's fine. But then whatever Incoterms you use, you will say as per contract, as per Incoterms 2010. If you're not mentioning it, you're using the Incoterms, then if tomorrow dispute happens, legally it is understood that by default it is 2020. So keep in mind that's the way I accept. Like it happened in 2010, I remember, even 2000 when I was dealing with it, it takes 1 to 2 years people to change over. But this time changes are not that many, so I expect people will incorporate very easily around. The future of this one, again, you may say, Incoterms are changing every 10 years. The next 10 years, who knows? If tomorrow we are going to the moon, we want to ship something to the moon, Incoterms may incorporate that also, guys. If you want to ship something to the moon, things will come. And today the world is becoming more and more digital. We're talking of Industry 4.0, Logistic 4.0. So I'm sure those factors will be looked into it by the next ones. Even now they have taken care of some digitization, but totality, yes, I think will be taken care of. Well, friend, with this, I want to thank you all for the patient hearing.